James Joyce's Dubliners is a novel composed of 15 short stories, each of which focuses on the life of a person in Dublin, Ireland. The book paints Dublin as a place of dull, weary people who long for adventure but are unable to escape their domestic lives. Of the stories, which require some summary that I'll get into later, we see a few central themes. I'm stuck, it's too late, and what do I do now? Let's focus on the first one, with a story which seems to be the pinnacle of paralysis. Evelyn. The first female protagonist in Dubliners is Evelyn Hill. In this story, Evelyn sits by her window holding 2 letters in her lap. The letters are farewell notes to her father and brother, because she's planning to elope with a boy named Frank. She becomes fervent and almost hysteric with the fear of repeating her mother's life, that of a dull, abused housewife. However, when she is at the docks, about to leave with Frank, she finds herself unable to follow him. Recalling the few memories she has of her father's gentleness and reciting a familiar and comforting prayer, Evelyn holds onto the railing and watches as Frank goes on without her. This story shows the most disheartening and permanent sort of paralysis. Though it isn't clear what sort of life Evelyn will live after she abandons her life with Frank, we are left with the notion that she will be forever in a state of limbo, between making her own decisions, yet remaining trapped in Dublin. Other stories show characters being stuck as well. In An Encounter, the main character feels physically trapped when an eccentric man begins to talk to him. The man leaves to presumably relieve himself into a river, and the narrator voices his intentions to give the man a false name and get away. But he ends up sitting in discomfort when the man comes back and rants about unruly children and how they ought to be whipped. This story in particular, mirroring the speech patterns of the strange man, points out the cyclical nature of people to follow routines and never escape their daily lives. These examples are some of many, including Kathleen in the story A Mother, who has to stand silent and awkward while her mother inadvertently ruins her career, and Polly in The Boarding House, who cries in her room until she can do nothing but lie back and wait for her mother and fiancé to tell her what her future will be. Moving on to the theme, It's Too Late, I can think of no better example than the story After the Race, which also points out some relevant political truths about Dublin at the time. After the Race explores the monetary status of several young men, but focuses on a boy named Jimmy. Jimmy, though very much interested in who he is seen with, is rather passive and content to ride along with whatever his friends are doing. Jimmy's father paid his way through college, even when it became apparent that Jimmy was squandering the money on his social life. Even then, his father found this endearing and did little to correct it. The story later introduces an Englishman named Ruth, who seems to best Jimmy in every endeavor. Jimmy is unable to keep up with dinner conversation, though Ruth has smart opinions, and the two nearly end up arguing. When the men go play cards, Jimmy has a moment when he realizes he's too drunk to be any good at the game, but he doesn't know what he's doing except losing money. Still, he resigns to the failure, and Ruth ultimately wins. In the last scene of the story, when Jimmy realizes he will regret his decisions the following day, his friend alerts him that the new day has already come. The story points out something of political importance, that England will triumph over the Irish, but that the Irish are resigned and lazy about it. Though they know there is a need for change, just like Jimmy, they are not changing it. To the contrary, people like Jimmy's father who claim to hate the English continue to make money by investing in foreign companies. A sadder tale, titled The Painful Case, also reverberates a melancholy feeling. Mr. Duffy, a lonely intellectual, begins spending much of his time with a woman named Emily, who is already married. Not wanting to continue on with a secret relationship, Mr. Duffy stops visiting Emily. 4 years later, he reads in a newspaper that Emily has been hit by a train. The most disturbing part of the story is that it hints strongly at the idea that Emily wanted to kill herself. Mr. Duffy feels that he shouldn't care about the woman as much as he did, because she must have been a drunkard. However, he ultimately wonders if he could have saved her life had he never broken up with her. Either way, it is too late now. Lastly, to consider the motif of what do I do now, we can also consider some of the more political statements about Dublin that Joyce was hoping to make. For this, we'll focus on his first story in the novel, which also has the youngest protagonist. It's titled The Sisters. The Sisters is a first-person account of the death of a priest, Father Flynn, who is a friend of the narrator, who is a young boy. Despite the narrator's respect for Father Flynn, A family friend named Old Cotter feels that boys ought to play with kids their own age, and that Father Flynn was wrong to teach the narrator about the inner workings of Catholicism at such a young age. The narrator keeps a straight face when he hears that Flynn is dead, and even when he visits Father Flynn's house, he doesn't quite grieve the way he thinks he should. Still, he refuses to eat crackers in the house because he thinks it would be too loud, as if he'd somehow disturb the dead man in the coffin. Father Flynn's 2 daughters, Eliza and Nanny, talk about his death. We find out that Father Flynn was going mad before his death, and was found muttering in a confessional after having dropped a chalice during a religious ceremony. Some critics have suggested that this death was the result of syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease, and that this explains his madness in the confessional. Father Flynn likely represents the Catholic Church in Dublin, which Joyce considered impure, too obsessed with tradition, and ultimately dying. The narrator represents a new generation of Dubliners who both fear and respect the religion without fully understanding it. The story titled Grace also comments on religion, following a man who falls down a flight of stairs while drunk, and is then convinced to attend a Catholic sermon. Ever the skeptic, the man agrees to accept the religion, but doesn't want to light any candles because he considers the ritual to be irrational. Once again, this comments on how Catholicism is too traditional and impersonal for Joyce. The 2 stories which I would say perfectly embody Dubliners are After the Race, which we've already explored, and A Little Cloud. Very little happens plot-wise in the story A Little Cloud. However, the final few paragraphs are very telling of all 3 themes in the novel. A timid man appropriately named Little Chandler meets with a friend who has explored the world and is a successful journalist. They talk about his travels, and Chandler returns home to his own books of poetry. He begins to write some of his own poetry, feeling empowered and a little jealous of his friend, but has to quit when he hears his baby crying. The frustration of his wife and screaming child finally break him, and he yells into the child's face, which prompts more screaming. His wife, furious, takes the baby away, and tears well in little Chandler's eyes as he realizes that he is stuck in this domestic life. It is too late for him to achieve his dreams, and he has no idea what to do next. Though these stories are melancholy and troublesome, it is important to think about why Joyce would write them. Sadness is not meant to defeat us. It is meant to inspire us. It seems that Joyce wanted to give people a wake-up call. Go live your dreams. Don't wait till it's too late. And just try your best to do the right thing and make choices that help the people around you, as well as yourself.